I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. On our program today, you'll meet Moshe Arens, an Israeli aeronautical engineer, researcher, diplomat, and politician. Since 1949, he was a part of Israel's history and served as a member of Israel's Congress, ambassador to the United States, and as Minister of Defense 3 times. Hello, I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, president and founder of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and sharing the message of Christian biblical responsibility to the people and land of Israel against the rise of a global genocidal anti-Semitism. I've come to realize that Israel is facing threats from nearly every corner, from Iran's nuclear weapons program, from terrorist groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. I also saw how much of the world opposes the Jewish state, from the UN to the European countries and to every one of Israel's neighbors. With threats and hatred spreading from every corner, it seems we're heading closer to the biblical prophecy of Armageddon in the Middle East. This wildfire of global hatred toward the Jewish state is now growing at an alarming rate. An ADL global study on anti-Semitism found that more than a quarter of the world's population harbors intense anti-Jewish sentiment. That translates to 1.1 billion people, even though 70% of those queried have never met a Jew. Mainstream media and educational campaigns continue to beat the drum against Israel, with weak to little response. The mantra of Israel as occupiers and thieves continues to grow. But PJTN is not and will not back down in the face of this rising tide. We will stand with Israel and the Jewish people and raise as many watchmen to join us as long as we have breath. Our program today features a gentleman who has put his life on the line to defend God's land. He did not back down and made a difference for God's people and covenant. Moshe Arens was born in 1925 in Lithuania, a country in the Baltic region of Europe. In 1939, the Arens family immigrated to the United States, where his father had business interests in New York City. During World War II, Moshe served in the United States Army as a technical sergeant. Following the Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948, he immigrated to Israel and joined the Irgun. He was sent to North Africa and Europe to help local Jewish communities establish self-defense groups. In March 1949, he returned to Israel and became a founding member of the Herut Party. In 1951, he returned to the United States and studied engineering at MIT and aeronautical engineering at Caltech, and later worked in the aircraft industry. From 1957 to 1962, Arens was a professor of aeronautics at the Technion. He is also the author of a number of articles in several books, including Broken Covenant, American Foreign Policy, and the Crisis Between the U.S. and Israel, Flags Over the Warsaw Ghetto, The Untold Story of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and In Defense of Israel, a memoir of a political life. After the Yom Kippur War, Arens entered politics and was elected to the Knesset as a member of Likud. After being re-elected in 1977, he became chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and in 1982 was appointed ambassador to the United States. When he went to D.C., he brought along his young protege, Benjamin Netanyahu, then 32, to work for him. He returned to Israel in February 1983 after being appointed Minister of Defense. After another re-election in 1988, he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs and in 1990 returned to the defense portfolio. After a short retirement, he returned to politics in 1999 when Netanyahu appointed him Minister of Defense. It was my distinct honor to sit down and speak with the late Mr. Arens in Tel Aviv several years ago. He was a wealth of information and an eyewitness to many events in Israel's turbulent history.
When Israel was founded on May 15, 1948, it was a very small, poor, beleaguered country, instantly invaded by the armies of the surrounding Arab states. It really didn't have an army as yet. It had a militia, young people, poorly armed, greatly outnumbered. A big difference from what you know today as the Israel Defense Forces, which, although we're still a small country, the Israel Defense Forces is a strong, I may even go so far as to say, a powerful army, very capable of defending Israel, and has defended Israel throughout the years of Israel's existence. The War of Independence in 1948, when we had to fight the combined onslaught of the Egyptian army, the Syrian army, the Iraqi army. Well, I was associated with the Irgun already in the United States before I came here. So when I came, I joined the Irgun, and politically I've been associated with the people from the Irgun, who then went into the politics and created a party that was led by Menachem Begin, afterwards by Yitzhak Shamir, today by Benjamin Netanyahu. As I told you, I'm an aeronautical engineer, so I had a certain prejudice in that direction. And during my tenure as defense minister, I put a great deal of emphasis on the development of systems here in Israel that would make the IDF stronger. One of these developments was reconnaissance satellites, and as you probably know, Israel today has a number of reconnaissance satellites which contribute and add to the information that we can get from the United States and its network of satellites. We have our own satellites that can provide us with information about areas that we are concerned about, like Iran at the present time. We developed during my tenure as defense minister the Arrow ballistic missile interceptor, a concept that at the time people thought was technologically impossible, something I wish we had during the Gulf War. We didn't have it yet, but today we have the Arrow system, and that system has a very high probability of intercepting any missiles that are launched our way. Well, we've had a number of waves of aggression against Israel throughout today, 64 years of Israel's existence. It started with the armies of the Arab countries, who felt very confident that they could defeat Israel. These were regular armies. They had tanks, they had aircraft, and naval craft. Israel at the time had almost nothing. But in a succession of wars, the War of Independence, the Suez Campaign in '56, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, it became clear that the Arab armies, even when they combined all their forces, even when they surprised Israel, they were not capable of defeating the IDF. And the next wave of aggression against Israel then was terrorism. If it couldn't be done by conventional armies, then maybe it could be done by terrorism. And in this day and age, terrorism is capable of inflicting massive casualties, as you know, in the United States in 9/11. Now, Israel's had to battle this wave of terrorism for a number of years. We were successful in defeating that terrorism in the year 2002 when the Israeli army entered Judea and Samaria, which had been under Palestinian control essentially prior to that, and which was the springboard for terrorist activity against the cities of Israel. So that wave of terrorism I think we have overcome. There came another wave then that goes under the initials of DBS, disinvestment, boycott, and sanctions, try to isolate Israel economically. Fortunately, Israel is strong economically, and I think that has not been successful. Today, we're facing the ultimate weapon of terror, namely a nuclear weapon in the hands of the Iranians, who announce almost daily that it is their intention to wipe Israel off the map. And I think we will handle that as well. Well, the Golan Heights originally, after World War I, when the Middle East was parceled up between Britain and France, had been intended to be part of what was called the Palestine Mandate, designated to be the future Jewish state. But the British and French and negotiations that they held between them, delineating the border between Syria and what was then Palestine, concluded that the Golan Heights would be moved over to be part of Syria. So those who claim that the Golan Heights have always been part of Syria simply don't know what they're talking about in terms of the historical facts. As a result of the Syrians being in control of the Golan Heights, and that's what they are heights overlooking the Jordan Valley and overlooking the Sea of Galilee, were in a position for many years to fire down upon Israeli civilians, Israeli settlements and Israeli towns that were down below the Golan Heights. And it was only in the Six-Day War that the IDF managed to capture the Golan Heights and free the Israelis living in the valley from the terror that endangered them for so many years from up above. The United Nations does not have the capability, does not have the power, certainly does not have the will to really do something about violations of UN Security Council resolutions, about the fact that Iran threatens Israel and other member of the United Nations with destruction. The United Nations has some 90 Arab and Muslim member states. There's an automatic majority against Israel regardless of whatever motion is put forth. We would have liked to be in a situation where we could turn to the United Nations and make sure that the United Nations would assure Israel's security, would prevent aggression against Israel. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Well, I'm not a believer in the land for peace formula. And I think today most Israelis do not believe in that formula, although in past years some did, and they were under the apprehension or misapprehension that if you only gave the Arabs enough land, in return there would be peace. And Israel's made very significant concessions. The biggest one of all was to the Egyptians in the peace treaty with Egypt, where something happened that had never happened in the history of international relations. A country that attacked Israel 5 times, was defeated 5 times, had everything they lost in the war returned to them. That's never happened before. The Gaza Strip, in effect, has been turned over to Hamas, and Israelis have suffered grievously as a result of the rockets that were launched from the Gaza Strip into Israel. And I think today most Israelis realize that if there were, if an Israeli government were to turn the Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, over to Palestinian control, the direct result would be missiles from that area into the population centers of Israel. So that's not likely to happen. The Israeli government has been trying to be very, very meticulous, I think because of criticism and pressure that's been applied from abroad, also from the United States. I think the position of the United States government to this day is that Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria are illegal, which is very far from being correct. There's no justification in international law or in Israeli law. As our Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he spoke before both houses of Congress, said, we do not come to Judea and Samaria as foreign occupiers. Right? You just need to read the Bible to know how true that statement is. Well, you know, one of the great and maybe the greatest Zionist leader, Jabotinsky, wrote a very famous article many years ago, in 1923. We're approaching maybe 100, almost 90 years from the time it was written. It was called The Iron Wall, in which he said that the only possibility for peace being established between the Jews and the Arabs in this area is once the Arabs are convinced that they have no chance of throwing the Jews into the sea, that they have no chance of destroying the Jewish state. And I think that that almost prophetic vision is correct to this day. When that day comes, and I think it will come, when it is really clear to everyone that there's no chance of forcing Israel out of the area, of throwing the Jews into the sea, then there may be a chance to proceed towards peace. In the wake of the defeat of Arab armies, we had a wave of terror strike Israel. And during a 2-year period or so, we lost 1,000 Israeli civilians as a result of Palestinian terrorist acts in the cities of Israel. Now, the base for that terrorist activity was in Judea and Samaria, in the Palestinian towns and villages of Judea and Samaria, so that we don't have to hypothesize what might happen if Israel were to evacuate that area, if the IDF were to evacuate that area. We've seen it before. We've seen that. We've been to that movie. That's what you call déjà vu. We've seen that, and I don't think Israelis want that to happen again.
I want to take you to Israel in pictures and film. I want you to see how God's sovereign hand can be seen before our eyes right here in this land. That's why PJTN is offering a special anniversary package that includes a captivating new book and award-winning DVD. Israel Rising is a unique visual story of Israel's miraculous journey from unforgiving desert to thriving nation. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Ezekiel foretold a future time in which the arid land of Israel would come alive for its people. Now this breathtaking book documents the fulfillment of this vision, as rarely seen photographs from the 1880s to the 1940s are juxtaposed with recent photos of the same locations. This book will inspire and captivate you as it illuminates Israel's foretold awakening in a new and unforgettable way. In addition, you'll receive the award-winning documentary, Israel Indivisible: The Case for the Ancient Homeland. This inspiring film examines the many political twists and turns that make Israel the world's most controversial nation. From Abraham and the Promise to the issues facing the Jewish state today, the film examines the historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical foundations for the modern state of Israel. This is a limited time offer for these two remarkable resources for just a one-time gift of $70 today. Your generous donation will help ensure that PJTN stays on the front lines and in the headlines of all the important issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren. So please go to pjtn.org today. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org. In 2008, Dr. Irving and Cherna Moskowitz established the Moskowitz Prize for Zionism to recognize people who put Zionism into action in today's Israeli society, at times risking their own personal security, placing the collective before the personal needs, and doing what it takes to ensure a strong, secure Jewish homeland. The need for this special prize arose from the feeling shared by many that the true Zionist heroes in today's Israel, those known to the public as well as those far outside the public spotlight, both young and old, do not always receive the institutional recognition and public praise they deserve. One of the traits shared by the Moskowitz Prize winners and many of the candidates is that each does not see themselves as an extraordinary person, not as a hero, but as one who simply fulfills their duty. As an Israeli, to make Israel a better, safer, more just place. And at the end of the day, a more Zionist home.
משה ארנס, הג'נטלמן של הפוליטיקה הישראלית, משתייך באופן מובהק לדור אחר. דור שהכיר את ז'בוטינסקי אישית, דור שלא נרתע מעבודת כפיים חלוצית בכדי ליישב את ארץ ישראל. כשאומרים לא עושים היום כאלה, בדיוק אליו מתכוונים. הוא לא מתלהם, לא צועק, וכשמשהו אינו לרוחו, הוא לא מפחד על משרתו ונעלם דום, אלא עושה מעשה ועוזב את הממשלה. אידיאליסט.
לו הייתי נשאר שר ביטחון, על אבי היה טס היום בחיל האוויר, מטוס הקרב הטוב ביותר בעולם.
הישג נוסף שנרשם לזכותו בזמן כהונתו כשגריר ישראל בארצות הברית הוא איתור ציר מוכשר ומיומן. בנימין נתניהו הצעיר.
לו היית שואל אותי אז, האם אתה חושב שהבחור הצעיר הזה הוא יום אחד יהיה ראש ממשלת ישראל, וייבחר לא פעם אחת, אלא פעם שנייה ופעם שלישית, נדמה לי אפילו פעם רביעית, אז הייתי אומר לך, זה חלום.
הערב מקבל משה ארנס את אות ההוקרה של פרס מוסקוביץ' לשנת 2017.
להענקת האות אני שמח להזמין אל הבמה את רעייתו של ארווינג מוסקוביץ', אשת חזון ומעש, הגברת צ'רנה מוסקוביץ'. מחיאות כפיים, בבקשה.
ידיד, אני רואה בך מורה גדול, ואני רוצה לאחל לך הרבה שנים של המשך יצירה פוריה. אתה צעיר, זקוף גב, בעיר מחשבה. אתה תורם את כל מרצך, לא רק לעם ישראל, אלא גם לאמת ההיסטורית. אתה עשית פעולה בלתי רגילה בספר שלך, שחושף את האמת על מה שקרה בגטו ורשה, על חלקם של לוחמי בית"ר, של האצי. אני חושב שתיקנת כאן עוול היסטורי ענק. ואני מודה לך גם באופן אישי, אבל גם בשם עם ישראל. אני מודה לך בשם עם ישראל על הכל.
ערב טוב. אני ציוני גאה. ציונות היא אהבת ארץ ישראל. ונאמנות למדינת ישראל. ציונות היא גם יחס של כבוד למיעוט שחי בתוכנו, לדרוזים, לצ'רקסים, לערבים המוסלמים, לערבים הנוצרים. להם אנחנו רוצים להבטיח מה שמובטח לכל אחד מאזרחי הישראלים היהודים, שוויון זכויות, שוויון הזדמנויות, אותן הזדמנויות שמדינת ישראל המתקדמת מאפשרת לכל אחד מאזרחיה להגיע אליה, ובבוא היום אנחנו מצפים גם לשוויון של חובות, כולל הנשיאה של החוב של הגנה על המדינה. השילוב של אזרחי המדינה הלא יהודים בחברה הישראלית, בכלכלה הישראלית, חייב להיות אחד היעדים העליונים של המדינה ושל אזרחיה היהודים. ציונים שהגיעו לגילי זכו לפרס. לראות עוד בחיים את הגשמת החלום שלהם. אין פרס גדול ממנו. לראות את מדינת ישראל כמה מתחזקת, מתעצמת, גם מתעשרת, בטוחה בעצמה וביכולת שלה לעמוד מול כל אתגר, מול כל אויב. אני מודה לוועדה שהחליטה לזכות אותי בפרס מוסקוביץ. אני מודה לצ'רנה מוסקוביץ. אני מודה לכל אחד מכם שבאו לחגוג כאן איתנו הערב את איחוד ירושלים. תודה רבה.
We want to thank the Moskowitz Award Committee for allowing us to join in this historic event. I pray you found some inspiration and hope from the amazing story of Moshe Arens. Well, that's our show, and I want to thank you for watching. The time to take a stand is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your senators, congressmen, the White House. Let your elected leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive free action alerts and order our films to share with family and friends. Please encourage everyone you know to tune in and become informed. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you and thank you for your support and prayers.